The following documentary deals with subjects that may upset certain members in the audience, as it presents possible interpretations of historic facts. The conclusions presented here are a matter of opinion. The evidence is real. In the second half of the 15th century, there lived an enlightened man by the name of Leonardo da Vinci. His genius became evident in all the fields into which he ventured. Engineer, architect, philosopher, inventor, and musician. Curiosity was the driving force behind his manifold activities. He dedicated his life to understanding how the world and anatomy worked, and how to multiply human strength. In each of his projects, he was ahead of his times, a unique character, a chosen one. But still, there are many mysteries surrounding his life. Signs, clues, and ciphers steal through his work and offer us a glimpse of other questions.
How can such popular images contain still unresolved enigmas? Where will Leonardo's labyrinth lead us? Almost 500 years after his death, we're still asking ourselves what mysteries Leonardo da Vinci concealed. And more specifically, the mystery we're going to investigate in this program. What did he try to depict in the Last Supper? And what secrets are hidden within it?
Year O marks the beginning of Christianity, which would result in the rise of the Catholic Church and its influence on Western culture. The Church would set the pace for the West through an intricate relation with art and, even more so, with science.
In 1452, here in Tuscany, the unstoppable genius Leonardo da Vinci was born. His encounter with the church was inevitable.
At that time, the church was the primary patron of all artists. Leonardo da Vinci was no exception. Indeed, some of his works are considered the official representations of certain key passages from the New Testament.
And here, ladies and gentlemen, is where the mystery begins. Taken for hundreds of years as being the Christian version of the moment that Christ gives communion to his disciples and announces Judas's betrayal, Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper holds several mysteries. The work depicts the moment that Jesus announces Judas's betrayal. He then warns that he'll be denied 3 times by Peter. He gives communion to his disciples and entrusts them with their pastoral mission. The Holy Chalice, along with the bread, the wine and the cross, is one of the most common Christian symbols throughout the ages. It has been depicted in hundreds of different ways. and many stories and legends have grown up around it. It is the emblem of Christianity and the legacy of Jesus. And yet, if we take a look at the Last Supper, the official version of this biblical passage, we see there is no chalice. Where is the chalice?
If we observe the painting closely, we see a wealth of bread. The diners have small cups or dishes that go unnoticed due to the deplorable condition of the painting today. As the bread and wine are being consecrated, we see before Jesus' image a glass, a plate, a bowl, several loaves of bread, a large empty dish.
The absence of the chalice is hardly an innocent oversight. It is just the first of the secrets hidden within the Last Supper. Why didn't Leonardo paint the chalice? Perhaps the painting tells us a different version of the life of Christ.
Few documents from Jesus' time recount his life story. In addition to the 4 books from the Bible, the Gospel according to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, there are other texts also written by the first Christians. These writings are called the Gnostic Gospels, or, in the case of the Church, which rejects them as heresy, the Apocryphal Gospels. Such texts include the Gospel according to Thomas, the Secret Book of James, the Gospel according to Mary Magdalene, the Acts of Thomas and of Peter, and the Gospel of Truth. They tell a story which is quite different from the one accepted by the Church and found in the Holy Scriptures. They were rejected by the Church and expressly condemned and excluded from the Bible. These texts tell a silenced story. They show us a Jesus different from the man we have come to know. Studies of Leonardo da Vinci's work have shown that it is possible to find therein hidden symbols taken from the Gnostic Gospels.
Now, if this is true, what is the story of Jesus that Leonardo is trying to tell us in the Last Supper? The absence of the chalice is just the tip of the iceberg. Because in the version that Leonardo tells us, there is a wife, and perhaps a descendant, a dagger, conspirators, secrets, and guardians of those secrets.
What is the true mystery behind the Holy Grail? Throughout history, the legend of the Holy Grail has moved thousands of men to try to find this holy ciborium. Its incalculable mystical and prize value have made it into the great lost object of the Christian era. The chalice has been sought by believers and converts, as well as by greedy merchants and fortune hunters. The search for it has entailed heroism, faith, and betrayal, as well as the quest for life eternal, for immortality.
Let's consider the possibility, just for a moment, that the chalice as such did not exist, and that its presence in the Gospels represents a metaphor, an idea. And it's this idea that Leonardo tries to depict in his work. That is to say, it has another meaning, not contained within the physical object. The cup was the receptacle from which Christ and his disciples drank at the Last Supper. That is, a celebration of the Testament. In many versions, the Holy Grail represents the blood of Christ. But let's ask a bold question. What does the blood of Christ represent? It's clear that by the absence of the Grail, Leonardo wants to say something in the Last Supper. Evidently, the image of the chalice had a different meaning for him. What does it mean to gather Christ's blood? Perhaps it means protecting royal blood that might be manifested in Jesus' descendants. In this case, the chalice might represent a woman's uterus, a wonderful cup to hold and germinate the seed of a royal descendant, or more specifically, Jesus' lineage. Let's recap. We have an artist like Leonardo, a multifaceted genius and personality, who left testimony of the key moments of Christianity, a religion of great influence, both in his world and in ours. We find puzzling differences between Leonardo's depiction, which was considered the official version, and the same events as they're described in the Bible. Especially at the table in the Last Supper, there is no chalice. Then we found from non-official documents that the Holy Grail, also known as the Sangreal, or royal blood, might represent two things. Firstly, the offspring and descendants of Jesus. Secondly, the womb that held Jesus' blood and gave forth his lineage. But there is another key detail. The disciple sitting next to Jesus at the Last Supper, always assumed to be John, seems to be a woman. Let's move closer into this heretical world. Let's try and see the other side of the story and find out if the key personalities really were heretics.
The non-official version tells us that there are a great many documents which tell the truth about the life of Christ, the apostles, and the pre-Christian world. It was never known for sure what these documents were, who had them, and how they had been preserved over the centuries. After the death of Jesus, Christianity, which was born as a Jewish sect persecuted by the Romans, begins to spread throughout Europe. This new faith convinces and converts barbarians and Romans alike until the year 325, when Roman Emperor Constantine I puts an end to the persecution by converting to Christianity. He proceeds to impose Christianity on Europe, making it the official religion. Early Christianity took many forms. A variety of sects professed their faith in Christ in ways quite different from the ones common today. With an iron hand and the support of kings and princes, powerful popes from Rome, who followed the Catholic and Apostolic doctrine, annihilated dissenting sects like the Cathars of southern France. There was even an unsuccessful attempt to take over the Eastern Orthodox Church, which survives into the present. But in the 8th century, the Muslim advance began. The Arabs attacked and occupied a good part of Europe and the Middle East. In a fight for power and faith, the European Christians launched the Crusades in 1099. These were religious military expeditions intended to retake the Holy Land. The Crusades gave rise to strange military orders enshrouded in legends and speculations. Among them, the Order of the Poor Knights of Christ, or the Knights Templar.
The story of the Knights Templar is one of the most enigmatic and exciting chapters in the history of Christianity. Let's begin at the beginning. Our story takes us back to the 11th century, when in 1099, Pope Urban, heir to Peter, an already incredibly powerful Catholic Church, takes Europe to war to reconquer Jerusalem, which was in the hands of the Muslims. Thus began the period known as the Crusades, almost 200 years of war, during which Europe bled in an attempt to conquer the Holy Land. 200 years during which knights, kings, and even children gave their lives out of blind faith. And what did they get for their sacrifice? Just fleeting kingdoms, the longest of which lasted only 50 years. This is where our tale begins.
In 1099, Godfrey de Bouillon led the First Crusade. He tore down the walls of Jerusalem, massacred the Saracen, and took over the city under the title of Defender of the Holy Sepulchre. Some theories hold that Godfrey de Bouillon was the bearer of a great secret that his family had kept since the times of Christ. To preserve this secret and find irrefutable evidence for it, he founded the Order of Zion, whose mission was to find documentation lost in the ruins of the Holy City. If this is true, Godfrey's participation in the Crusades was not just a matter of geopolitics or faith. The Order of the Poor Knights of Christ, or the Knights Templar, was created in Jerusalem under the reign of Godfrey's cousin, Baldwin II. The declared aim of the Poor Knights was to defend Christian pilgrimages. These knights were, in fact, the armed wing of Godfrey's Order of Zion. We do know that, in keeping with this theory, many of the founders and members of the Order were indeed members of the Order of Zion. One thing is for certain. The Knights Templar, who got the name from the headquarters located at the ruins of the Temple of King Solomon, did not spend the first years of their existence just patrolling the Holy Land. Once inside the stables of the ancient temple, they spent their time digging and digging.
What were 9 Knights Templar, supposedly in charge of the pilgrim's safety, doing digging around in the ruins of King Solomon? And what did they find there? Nobody knows. But surprisingly, minor order of warrior monks quickly became one of the most powerful corporations in Europe. They were granted countless benefits and papal exemptions when Pope Innocent II granted a papal bull granting them absolute power and independence from any political or religious authority. The good fortune of the Knights Templar lasted into the middle of the 14th century. In addition to papal exemptions, they received gifts and donations from noblemen across Europe. They amassed such a fortune. They acquired property in over 12 countries, started extending loans to ruined royal families, loans to be repaid with generous interest. Thus the Knights Templar were the origins of what would much later become the International Credit Bank. Why did the Church give them such special treatment? Was it thanks to the secrets they discovered in the ruins of King Solomon's temple?
But every power has its limits, and the Knights Templar were no exception. They met their end in the 14th century. They were overtaken on a night steeped in violence, fire and blood. The year was 1307. pressured by debts and in need of funds for a new crusade, the devout King Philip IV of France decided that the Templars had gone too far. In a joint military operation, all of his soldiers received a sealed order, an envelope that could not be opened until Friday, October 13th. Its contents were fatal for the Knights Templar. They were accused of being heretics, Satanists, sodomites, blasphemers, and crimes too horrendous to name. As a result, they were to be arrested immediately, and the treasures embargoed. Once again, the cross was drenched in blood.
Until the end of the order, 2 centuries later, the Templars guarded their secret. Neither torture nor torment could get them to speak a single word about what they had found. Evidently, whatever secret information they had unearthed in the ruins of King Solomon was worth paying for with their lives. Could these be the documents that spoke about Jesus' favourite and beloved disciple? Might they speak about the centrality of a woman, Mary Magdalene, and how she carried Jesus' lineage in her womb? The Holy Grail was not a cup. Then what?
But the secret of the Knights Templar did not die with the order. To keep the secret alive, the survivors created the Priory of Sion, a secret organization. According to the Dossier Secret, mysterious documents found at the National Library in Paris, Leonardo was a Grand Maester of the Priory of Sion, an organization that exists even today.
Is it possible that Jesus had a wife and descendant? What is the relation between the sacred mystery guarded by the Knights Templar and the Last Supper, Leonardo's famous fresco? And what relation does this have to the absence of the chalice in Leonardo's painting?
It is conceivable, then, that this master painter depicted the Grail symbolically, basing the images on the Templar secrets, which he had been entrusted to keep. The Grail, then, might be Mary Magdalene's womb, which held Jesus' blood, or, in other words, his descendants. In the Last Supper, all of the apostles have a clearly masculine stance. Yet, if we take a closer look, the position of a would-be John, who's leaning forward, is quite womanly. His features and attitude are also feminine. Further data confirms this. The garments worn by Mary Magdalene and by Jesus, with their inverted colors and shapes, complement each other. They manifest the meeting of opposites and complements. Leonardo da Vinci obsessively sketched out all of his works, taking measurements and using diagonal and parallel lines and formulas. As in each of his projects he used to work with hidden lines, it is possible to think that the straight lines that form the letter M for Mary Magdalene are not just a random occurrence.
Is the chalice the cavity formed between these two figures? Does this imply that Mary Magdalene was pregnant with Jesus' child? What did Leonardo think about women?
Leonardo's predilection for androgynous figures with a certain subtle feminine charm was noteworthy. Figures that were almost divine, contours of an imperious beauty. Femininity would always be present in his work. Women, mothers, virgins, these became recurring images. Yet, Leonardo died single and had no children, and in his many biographies, female lovers were never mentioned.
His work is full of female figures. Would we dare to say that the Last Supper suggests another deity, next to Jesus, a female deity? Saying that Leonardo painted Mary Magdalene and not John the Apostle to the right of Jesus is a daring statement. And it forces us to take a closer look at this woman's role in the Gospels. There are two figures in the Bible who have always been difficult to grasp, and yet both are crucial to the life of Jesus. The first is John the Baptist, who some say was Jesus' cousin. The relationship between these two figures was one of love and rivalry. The other is Mary Magdalene. Mary, who washed Jesus' feet and was the only woman at his side not related by blood. Just as John the Baptist can be considered the beginning, Mary Magdalene, the first to see Christ risen, can be considered the end. The beginning and the end, like a knot. One of the many knots that Leonardo liked to invent.
And one of his disciples, whom Jesus loved, was leaning next to Jesus. Actually, the idea that Mary Magdalene was a prostitute, as the Holy Scriptures are officially rendered, is far from true. What is certain, however, is that she had some sort of intimate relationship with Jesus, one much closer than the official text put across. She was one of the women who stayed at the foot of the cross. All four official Gospels agree that she was the first person to approach the empty sepulchre in Easter.
Isn't it logical that he would choose to appear before the mother of his future child? Perhaps Mary Magdalene was chosen by Jesus to be the true mother of Christianity, the redeemed woman, the faithful companion who bore his seed, the one who sat to his right. But nonetheless, darkness fell on Mary Magdalene. Why?
Throughout its history, the Catholic Church has tirelessly opposed any sexual contact whose object is not strictly reproductive. Sex itself is considered sinful and experienced with guilt. The denial of the flesh. The very origins of Jesus, son of an intact woman. This was a truly unnecessary detail, because Jesus could well have been illuminated by God, being the son of a chosen couple. Descendants of the Virgin Mary whose body could not be corrupted. The absence of women among the apostles, who left their families to accompany Jesus. The witch hunting of the Holy Inquisition. Women have been called godless, corrupt, lustful.
Why do those who claim spiritual authority fear woman? For the traditional church, Mary Magdalene's sexuality was not difficult to exploit. The woman of the 7 demons, the sinner. In this figure, it was easy to relate carnal contact with a deficiency that needed redemption. There is, however, a more troublesome question. A question that, because unresolved, has become a taboo. Its very mention is a sin. Christ's sexuality. Is there any real reason to believe that Christ was celibate, or even advocated celibacy? The answer is no.
The alleged celibacy of Jesus and his apostles is considered an unquestionable truth. Yet, it is not a logical conclusion. Among Jews, not having children was deemed a sort of betrayal of God's plan. A 30-year-old man without children, or at least a wife, would certainly have called public attention. The chronicles of the times would not have failed to record this fact, especially if the person in question was at the center of public life. Everyone knows that Christ and his followers had many enemies. They would not have refrained from calling these men homosexuals, which, in those days, was considered a crime that was severely punished.
Women in Leonardo's work allude to the angelical, the unobtainable, the eternal and pure, while men are strength, violence and intrigue.
But Leonardo's relation with the masculine feminine was far more complex than that. History tells us that in 1476, a 17-year-old boy accused a group of young men of sodomy. Leonardo da Vinci was one of those youths. And no one was able to keep Leonardo from spending 2 months in jail. It is curious how the official biographers tried to avoid this episode as if it were a shameful blemish. Leonardo's homosexuality is a fact. His young assistant Salai and his friend Melzi appear on the list of lovers this man had, for whom women were superior beings, almost unreachable, like Madonnas, absent mothers, the wives of a god.
Leonardo was a particularly charismatic, attractive and strong man who was literally capable of bending a horseshoe with his bare hands, as if it were made of lead. At the same time, he was an exceptional flute, lyre and mandolin player, as well as a cook and storyteller. It's hard to imagine that a single sex could satisfy the boundless energies of this enlightened man, for whom the universe was just a playground.
However, suggesting that Leonardo might use his work to indirectly express his sexual preferences is frivolous. Mary Magdalene's presence in the Last Supper is more than psychology or the declaration of sexual identity. It is, rather, a definite stance. Supposedly, Leonardo was a member of a secret association like the Priory of Sion, a heretical group that defended Mary Magdalene's position in the church. Due to the prevailing censorship, this political and moral stance could only be conveyed through symbols.
With this information, it's easy to answer the question we asked at the beginning. Why did Leonardo paint a woman next to Jesus in the Last Supper? The answer is obvious. Because he believed she should be there. But what dangers did the master face in deciding to offer this version of the Bible? And why the secrecy of the message? Why was the mother of the church turned into a sinner who just washed Christ's feet? The life of Jesus stirred up passion, controversy, uncertainty, infighting of all sorts. Could Peter and the apostles have imagined just how powerful the religious institution in the making would one day become? Why is there only a virgin mother and no wife in the most powerful religion in the Western world? In the Catholic Church, the role of woman seems to have been reduced to representing solely saintliness and devotion.
Though he enjoyed the protection of the powerful, Leonardo da Vinci risked everything to present a version of the Gospels that had been denied and forbidden by the very church that commissioned his work. We might think of it as a jest, but nothing that Leonardo ever did was naive. In fact, we're speaking of a mission.
Actually, Leonardo da Vinci was on a mission. The artist, inventor, musician, cook, philosopher, spiritual rebel had a mission. And much of his life revolved around that mission. For in his time, Leonardo da Vinci was Grand Master of the Priory of Sion, a direct heir of the Knights Templar, keeper of the true religion of Christ and Mary Magdalene, repository of the Holy Grail legacy. And although as an artist Leonardo could put on a disguise, he would never betray himself. And that's why the true story, his authentic faith, shouts out from all his work. Even though he might later keep his mouth shut and even deny it, what was said was said. And as the artist himself used to say,
vision is the primary means to full understanding. Painting is superior, and it takes precedence because it does not vanish when it is born. Io, Leonardo da Vinci.
And his work still speaks. Can we imagine Leonardo participating in secret ceremonies, carrying out ancient and forbidden rituals?
It is not difficult to imagine Leonardo as an indefatigable, highly worthy man, capable of communicating with all sorts of people. An ideal person to preside over a surreptitious activity because of his innumerable connections with both people in power and at the fringes of society. Furthermore, his reputation as a great and restless artist and his wide range of activities meant that he could be seen anywhere without arousing suspicion. As the Catholic Church never wanted the true relationship between Jesus and Mary Magdalene to come to light, there is a hidden message in Leonardo's work. Everything indicates that the biblical passage depicted by Da Vinci is taken from the Gnostic version of the texts. Texts that many Christians do not even know they exist.
If Jesus' desire was to marry Mary Magdalene, have children with her, and make her the mother of the church, then at what point, and thanks to whom, did the idea of a female divinity disappear from Christianity? Up until the 4th century in Europe, there were a large number of sects, considered heretical, whose worship centered on the divinity of Mary Magdalene. The official church worked hard to annihilate these sects. The Patriarchate had a tough battle ahead, a battle that had begun long before.
And one of his disciples, whom Jesus loved, was leaning next to Jesus.
We return to this verse time and again because it's one of the few that suggests the truth about Mary Magdalene's presence at the Last Supper. Take careful note of the attitude of the royal couple. It attests to the intimacy, the trust that united them. Even though the disciples scorned Mary Magdalene, they requested that she ask Jesus who he thought was going to betray him. It's possible that she listened to them with resignation and tolerance. Perhaps she knew that in the excitement of these men, in their hands and gestures, in such agitated devotion, there was a dagger. To whom does the hand holding the dagger belong? And what does this knife symbolize?
For the Catholic Church, the hand holding the dagger represents Judas' impending betrayal. In Leonardo's writing, he attributes the knife to the hand of Peter, who would use it to cut the bread. Nonetheless, if we take a closer look, we see the end of a forearm which does not belong to Peter. Given the angle, it could be believed to be Mary Magdalene's hand, but the length of the arm is not right. It is absurd to think that Leonardo da Vinci, master of proportions, creator of the Vitruvian Man, could have erred when rendering the dimensions of one of his major works. The latent aggression in Peter's visible hand is also striking. It comes close to Mary Magdalene's neck, pantomiming the slitting of her throat.
Frequently, the Gospels lead us to believe that the male disciples had limited comprehension. Time and again, the phrase, "and they did not understand him," appears. And reference to Peter's jealousy of Jesus' relationship with Mary Magdalene is also recurring. Peter, the founder of the Catholic Church, represents political power. Mary, Jesus' wife and the mother of his descendants, represents the spiritual lineage, divine power. Perhaps Jesus was both man and saint, a just man and a holy sinner. Together we've begun to unveil the mysteries that this Renaissance genius named Leonardo da Vinci has left us. Do you dare follow me down a road so riddled with questions?
The following documentary deals with subjects that may upset certain members in the audience, as it presents possible interpretations of historic facts. The conclusions presented here are a matter of opinion. The evidence is real. In the 14th and 15th century after Christ, there lived a visionary overflowing with talents. Leonardo da Vinci. Like an alchemist's crucible, he gathered art, science, the occult, music, poetry, cooking, the endless search for answers, and the celebration of life. His name was a symbol for his times, one of the most vibrant in the history of civilization, the Renaissance. Always carefully watched by religion, Leonardo tried to uncover the magical meaning of the world. And that's why he was much more than an artist. He aimed to understand the very mechanism of life and to defeat death. From the time he started painting until the present, the third millennium after Christ, he has been damned as a heretic, an occult scientist, and an alchemist time and again. And time and again, he managed to dodge these accusations.
It was not easy for someone who lived when and where Leonardo did to avoid accusations like these, especially when Leonardo might well have been all three of these things: a heretic, an occultist, and above all, an alchemist. In today's chapter, we will follow Leonardo's footprints down the paths of forbidden knowledge into Leonardo's esoteric world.
Dark art was spread through symbols, basically because they were forbidden sciences, but also because the secrets conveyed could not always be put into words. Formulas that attempted to transmute elements, invoke angels, generate life. How could such formulas be named? Although generally hidden in pictorial work, these secret symbols and messages were sometimes found in the design of buildings and even some Christian cathedrals.
Although alchemy has been regularly and unequivocally refuted by science from as early as the 4th century, the very word makes us think of hidden paths, sealed doors, and well-kept secrets. The word alchemy literally means black earth and dates back from ancient times. Its aims have much in common with modern-day medicine, biogenetics, and even physics. Indeed, discoveries such as cloning, DNA, and the energy from black holes are more connected with the aims of the ancient thaumaturgist than religion or science have ever admitted to. The very mention of the word alchemy alludes to spiritual searching, mysteries, and formulas for transformation, considered the exclusive terrain of God.
In vulgar terms, alchemy tries to find a formula to transform any common metal into gold. But that is just a metaphor for much deeper quests. Some of alchemy's principles are found in a book called Timeo by Plato. There, the Greek philosopher asks himself what the universe is made of and who created it. His answer is that the world and life are made up of 4 elements: fire, water, air, and earth, in a certain proportion. Indeed, proportion is the 5th element that serves to bind all the others together. It is the soul, the essence of life. Discovering this sacred proportion was the aim of the alchemists. With it, they could find the elixir of youth, the secrets of eternity, the migrating soul.
It is not far-fetched, then, to find hidden symbols in Leonardo's work. More than 550 years later, his messages still seem to us like knowing winks. A subtle affirmation that history was never really as it was told. That light is more than they told us it was. That God is represented as much in the proportions of a flower as in the dome of a cathedral. Let's take a look at what might be considered Leonardo's most revolutionary piece, Adoration of the Magi. A set of cryptic messages and mysterious techniques. Although artistically this painting is 5 centuries ahead of its time, metaphorically it formulates enigmas and readings that we may never be able to decipher.
As if in a nightmare, strange characters are on the fine line that separates life and death. Truncated stairwells that lead nowhere. Unfinished figures, ghosts. Runaway horses. And the baby Jesus at the center of the scene. Some are smiling, but others look preoccupied, serious, as if this entire scene were dubious, not a magical and secret occurrence. The king's court seems to be in a state of great unrest.
Christmas is associated with the angel's announcement and the joy caused by the birth of Jesus. Leonardo, however, depicts a startled and above all uneasy crowd. What is really happening in this version of the veneration of the kings before Jesus?
The kings are not depicted as they usually are, but rather like terrified old men. The other visitors to the manger are creatures somewhat between life and death. Although faith is felt throughout the piece, doubt and uncertainty are also present, like a dagger that puts a strain on the situation. There is a feeling that something dreadful is about to happen. The characters seem blinded by a dull light, where there is no place for life. There is nothing of the traditional epiphany. Instead of bliss, the faces of the kings look stricken and imploring. And the focus of the piece, the baby Jesus, looks bleak and severe, almost adult-like. It is not easy to find the joy that one would expect in this scene.
The Adoration of the Magi is one of the strangest pieces from Leonardo's entire body of work. For years it was considered unfinished. We now know that in making it, Leonardo used techniques that the artists and critics of his time could not understand. Many have called this piece unfinished without grasping the allegorical nature of the figures. What is Leonardo telling us through these imploring old men who seem closer to hell than to earth? What is the mysterious Leonardo telling us by using enigmatic expressions that confuse a scene that no longer held any secret? Adoration of the Magi is laden with esoteric signs that, as the alchemist said, can only be found with those who have eyes to see. Let's do what the alchemist did then. Let's look with eyes that see.
In this work, Leonardo presents us with a landscape charged with hermetic symbols. After an in-depth analysis, it becomes clear that these symbols support the theory about the master's knowledge and practice of alchemy. While the church had eradicated alchemy around 1300, the practice continued in different dissident groups, including the sect that believed that John the Baptist was the true Messiah. If we study it carefully, Leonardo's entire work seems to be an argument against Jesus and in favor of John the Baptist. In the first place, there is a large carob tree, a species closely related to John the Baptist, whom the Bible tells us ate its fruit seasoned with honey. Oddly enough, while those near Jesus seem to be suffering and fearful, those around the carob tree look smiling and happy. Other characteristic elements of alchemy also appear in this mysterious canvas. The three wise men bear myrrh and frankincense. However, gold is missing from the gifts presented to Jesus. Gold, the ultimate goal of the alchemists and symbol of the transmutation or elevation of the spirit. In addition, the representation of life and death, illustrated with incomplete figures, lights and shadows, represents the final frontier that the alchemists attempted to breach, that of life everlasting. In this painting, Leonardo da Vinci, the explorer of limits, seems to have come upon a quandary.
What is the precise boundary between life and death? What lies there? What was death for Leonardo? A parallel world? A cosmic evolution? Or just freedom and release from an imperfect body?
While I thought I was learning how to live, I was learning how to die. Leonardo da Vinci.
Images of life and death trapped in a fleeting instant. Only a keen observer of life could approach the other side of existence in this way. An observer with an unyielding third eye, the talent of an artist, and the curiosity of an alchemist.
At dusk, Leonardo was often found lost by caves, observing falcons. Other afternoons, he could be seen at markets near the stall where birds were sold. He enjoyed the simple act of observing life. But he could also be found at a hospital with old men whose skin, dry as parchment, announced the end of life. Supposedly keeping them company in the final hours, Leonardo closely watched the final seconds of life. But that was not all that Leonardo did.
From the most ancient times, it has been taboo to touch corpses. Dissection was not just forbidden, it was considered a diabolic act. Catholicism, as well as many other religions, forbade the study of an inert body. For Leonardo da Vinci, though, death was not a brutal fall into emptiness, but the harmonious culmination of existence. For Leonardo, a body bereft of life was a broken but wondrous machine to be studied. Leonardo became a frequent and clandestine visitor to the hospital mortuary. The hours of darkness seemed most appropriate for these visits, when his figure could be seen slipping past, hooded and silent. Perhaps it bothered him to enter the morgue like a conspirator and not as a scientist. But this initial rush of adrenaline was just the prelude to his true fascination, which was reserved for later. The covered bodies, decomposing quickly, the candlelight, the final gesture of a departed life, the potent silence, his feverish hand on his notebook, the odour that rose like a fog.
An absolute prohibition, a religious taboo, a possible accusation of heresy. These were not enough to stop his drive to investigate. He had spent years preparing for this task. His mentor, Verrocchio, had said time and again that a good artist must know the human body in depth. Know how an arm moves, or a facial muscle when a person cries, or the lines that form on a face with the passing of time. But Leonardo went beyond the anatomy and delved into dead bodies to discover the traces of the last breath. Leonardo discovered that the spinal column consisted of 31 vertebrae and not 30, as had been previously believed. This final vertebra was essential to understanding the spinal column as a whole. Leonardo discovered the key to joints in the human body, and he kept it secret, as if it were dangerous information, an alchemistic equation glowing in the cold of a dead body. The first chord in the symphony of God.
Wherever there were contorted mouths, entranced expressions, ecstatic souls, you could find Leonardo with his notebook, always obsessed with capturing the very moment that life left the body, finding the exact proportion of all things, the essence of life, the soul, the basic concerns of the alchemists. Is it conceivable that a man as bold and curious as Leonardo da Vinci, a man who questioned everything, an androgynous free thinker, a master of mixture and potion, would not venture down the roads of alchemy? But alchemy was heresy. But practices that do not respect traditional dogma have always been labelled as heresy, even when they search for knowledge and are guided by reason.
Alchemy came to be called the black art in order to discredit it and persecute those who practiced it. The search for the soul was exclusive dominion of God or his representatives here on earth, the pastors of the flock, the guardians of good and evil, the members of the all-powerful church.
To avoid trouble, Leonardo denied being an alchemist. He claimed he was a mystic scientist and a naturalist. But once the authorities satisfied left him alone, his easel became his table, his palette his scales, and his canvas a melting pot. Leonardo da Vinci aspired to the highest creation imaginable. By inverting God's process, he sought to reach the soul through mechanics, to mix the elements of the universe, to create a perfect and living machine.
Everything has a mechanism. All the mechanisms in the world can be reproduced. All that is missing is a formula. Leonardo da Vinci.
But like a good Renaissance man, Leonardo was not satisfied with the answers offered by faith. He looked for his own answers. What was left of life once life had departed? God was not going to tell him how to live his life. With respect to death, the secret of death might be revealed, but he needed to search a little more. If they'd only let him search a little further. Let's recap. In the Adoration of the Magi, we find countless symbols taken from alchemy. These lead us to believe that Leonardo was an alchemist, or at least studied thaumaturgy, and incorporated many of their codes into his work.
Although aware of the prohibitions, Leonardo moved forward in his research. His will was stronger than any threat. He was no stranger to pretending, and he moved through different social circles like fish in water. A famous artist could well delve into a secret world if in it he might find the answers to his primordial questions. He was at peace with God and with art, but he was destined to research wherever this investigation might lead him.
The search for the perfect proportion was a constant in Leonardo's life. Everything he did was touched by the mathematics of music, the geometry of nature, astronomy, even the perfect combination of pleasures. Leonardo searched on and on. The old question echoed in his head like a beating drum. Did God use a certain key to create man and nature?
The key is a mathematical formula, a formula that God used to create the world and man, the sacred formula of proportions. Leonardo devoted his life to discovering this formula. And one of his most successful pieces, Vitruvian Man, is a faithful reflection of that obsession. In this piece, Leonardo da Vinci depicts complementary compounds in a harmonic whole. The meeting of opposites is one of the basic principles of alchemy. The Vitruvian Man figure brings together man and world, the dynamic and the static, the square and the circle. All parts tend to join the whole in order to escape, perhaps, incompleteness. Leonardo da Vinci. His trunk and 4 limbs represent the number 5, a number with esoteric importance. It is the number of balance, the medium between heaven and earth, the exact spot. This drawing is recognized as a 5-pointed star. For pagan cultures, this shape was depicted as a pentacle, a pre-Christian symbol associated with nature. The number 5 also alludes to the harmony of feminine and masculine elements, the yin-yang of the East. The precise harmonic formula that reveals what the world's balance consists of. The ineffable that rules us and gives us life. Spices that are mixed together to become part of a single potion, one after another until the magma is formed. The recipe sought by the alchemists. Fire, water, air, earth, and the 5th element. The 5 compounds that make up the universe.
Understanding the body and chemistry, studying the limits of life and of death, and coming up with food with an alchemist's touch. Cooking offered Leonardo numerous satisfactions, not only the pleasures of investigating and creating and mixing, but for Leonardo, cooking opened doors to both noble and common men.
In cooking, Leonardo found a means to combine his eagerness to explore and his search for perfect proportions with practical and mundane amusements. In any event, in cooking he never gave up his principles: research, the aesthetic quest. Cooking, like alchemy, entails a series of set values that are bound together through an essence, in this case, the talent or unique personality of the one who combines the elements. That's why in cooking, like in all creative acts, each dish is unrepeatable and unique.
Measuring, recording, counting, weighing, measuring harmonically. Just as it was said, "Give me a fulcrum and I will move the world," Leonardo might have said, "Give me the exact measure of all things, and I will tell you the nature of the soul." Leonardo obsessively counted and recorded everything that came into his hands, from the parts of a meal to the angles of rays of light as they hit a village, or the relationship between a man's members and the weight of his heart. What is the formula for the universe? Leonardo perceived that the 4 elements that make up the world, earth, air, fire and water, have a cosmic vibration. The soul perceives this vibration through the 5 senses. Every atom in the universe has an energy that can be translated into an audible frequency. This is called music. It is for good reason that music is called the universal language. Music is the key to the soul's hidden paths. One way or another, music has been involved in rituals for centuries, because it is the medium through which we communicate with the gods and beyond. Indeed, life itself is driven by the percussive beating of the heart.
Alchemists sense the potential of music's mystical power. Music is trance and journey. Angels call on the road to the beyond. It opens doors to another dimension. For Leonardo, it might be the key, the sacred vehicle.
Few in Florence could sing or play music like Leonardo. He thought up and invented lutes, often in fanciful shapes, like a skull, a horse, or even a fish's belly. Indeed, Lorenzo Medici did not consider Leonardo a painter, but a musician. Could there be a relation between Leonardo the musician and Leonardo the alchemist?
As a magician, he knew how to confound the limits of reality for his audiences at the royal courts. As an alchemist, he knew the exact emotion, weight and measure a musical note would produce on a sensitive soul. Memories of other lives, visions of the future, Leonardo pulled away at souls like a curious child trying to figure out how to take his toys apart.
For Leonardo and the Renaissance masters, the search for perfect proportions through music and the human body was a central theme. The same idea was manifest in architecture. Is there music in objects? Is the universe just a changing tide that we can glimpse just a small piece of? At that time, these ideas sounded esoteric. But with the passing of time and the advance of science, it became clear that Leonardo was scratching at the surface of several truths, even though he could not prove them.
A table of grotesque men, with their smiling host at its head. After gathering together people with the most wretched faces imaginable, he got them drunk and began to tell jokes, one after the other, until laughter further disfigured their faces. In his mind, the artist recorded these faces with their impossible deformed shapes. Later he would spend sleepless hours rendering every detail in charcoal and paper.
Beauty and ugliness seem to make each other more powerful. Leonardo da Vinci.
What was Leonardo looking for behind those grotesque grins? What beauty did he find in ugliness? Leonardo could not conceive of beauty without first understanding the essence of ugliness. Searching for truths through opposites, Leonardo investigated the very point where opposites meet and a secret is revealed.
Leonardo considered his fellow men imperfect beings, bodies carrying around souls. Bodies, young or old, male or female, beautiful or ugly, but all of them contained an everlasting soul, an essence riddled with unknown, a mystery throughout time, an enigma that led Leonardo on a tireless search.
Might there not be harmony in ugliness? Might the seed of death be found in life? Or perhaps only by being close to death can we catch a glimpse of life's secrets?
Everything that Leonardo painted or drew followed a logical and harmonious path. It began at his eyes. It was then meticulously dismembered in his mind, went into his heart, and finally left through his hands. Obviously transformed, made sacred. the ugly and the beautiful, the old and the young, the male and the female, and both at once. One detail at a time, Leonardo could convey the complex mechanism of a machine or the ungraspable power of a jumping horse.
It is often said that painting was Leonardo's way of life. Indeed, it was the only activity that he never abandoned. He tried all the disciplines and delved into every art form. But in the end, he spoke through the pencil and the paintbrush. It was there that with a steady hand, he filled the vast silence of the empty canvas with answers. It was there that he truly found himself.
The drawing of a witch before a mirror could almost be considered a confession of Leonardo, the alchemist. In it, a young woman is looking at herself in a mirror. If we look closely, however, we see the likeness of an old man in the figure of the young woman. Not coincidentally, this old man looks a great deal like Da Vinci. This sketch not only manifests the notion of unity, but also androgyny as the ultimate perfection of all beings. These two beings coexisted in Leonardo.
Leonardo's influence has been felt for over 5 centuries and will doubtless be felt for many more. But let's try and imagine how the power of his work must have affected his contemporaries. What did his contemporaries think about this genius? Did they see him as an outstanding artist, an esoteric rebel, or a master of alchemy? Let's take a look at the School of Athens by the renowned master Raphael, a contemporary of Leonardo's. In this painting, Raphael gives Plato the unmistakable face of Da Vinci and places him in the center of the painting as the transcendental figure of the times. Let's look in detail at this painting, an amalgamation of historical characters and times.
Raphael depicts Leonardo as Plato, with two far from coincidental characteristics. First, hand pointing to the sky is clearly the gesture of John the Baptist. Leonardo da Vinci uses this gesture to depict John the Baptist in all his pieces. In a certain way, it manifested his secret rebellion against dogma.
But the second detail is more telling. Under his left arm, Leonardo carries a copy of Plato's Timeo, considered the Bible for alchemists. In the School of Athens, Raphael captures the spirit of the Renaissance. But more importantly for us, it proves that for his contemporaries and colleagues, Leonardo was known to practice the secret sciences of alchemy. Investigating the dead, alchemy, the search for the mysteries of the migrating soul. Did Leonardo believe in life after death? Could it be said that he identified with the idea of reincarnation? Where could he come into contact with such ideas?
Around the year 1494, no one knew where Leonardo was. He was not seen at any of the places that he normally frequented. Though it has been said that he traveled to the east, many of his biographers doubt that fact. Leonardo's notebooks contain a thorough description of the Mount Taurus in Egypt, and there are Eastern-inspired landscapes in the background of many of his pieces from after this period. But more importantly, the East is felt in the artist's philosophy and his alchemistic sciences. Many of Leonardo's biographers also affirm that he was a vegetarian and that he professed a constant respect for animals and that he was concerned with how humans could harm nature. All of these tenets are very common in the land of the rising sun. This seems to be more than just a coincidence then, especially if we remember that there is considerable evidence suggesting that his own mother, Caterina, was a slave from the Middle East. No being ends in nothingness. Leonardo da Vinci.
The evidence accumulates, the esoteric, alchemical messages in his work, especially in the adoration of the Magi. His incessant search for the boundary between life and death. His secret visits to hospitals and morgues to portray the last moments of life and an attempt to understand death. He recorded the ugly and the grotesque in order to understand beauty in its entirety. His passion for cooking, the art of transcending the simple combination of ingredients. His work, The Vitruvian Man, clearly demonstrates his search for totality, completeness, the force of opposites. His inclination to understand music in terms of mathematics, life in terms of mechanics. His obsession with formulas and the exact proportion of all things. Are these just suspicions, or is there something more? Just as Leonardo transformed oils and dyes into some of the most memorable works in the history of humanity, might he not have understood the quintessence of all things? Some believe that not all of Leonardo's writings have been found. Could it be that Leonardo himself destroyed them?